Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. On the weekend, I had the opportunity to be with some of my best friends from Stratfordville, from public school, Ontario, where we grew up. And traditionally, we tell a lot of stories. And somehow the question came up. A lot of us do work in manufacturing. It's like, where are all the people going? And this whole struggle on whether it's keeping people or just the curiosity of what is going on with this shortage. And all of a sudden, 2 years ago, they were there and now they're not. People are waiting in line for a job. Now we can't find them. But really, what can we do about it? And so I have a friend and expert, Joe Mull is our guest today. He writes about commitment in the workplace. He's the author of the new book coming out, Employalty: How to Ignite Commitment and Keep Top Talent in the New Age of Work. And we need that in manufacturing. He hosts his own podcast, Better Boss Now, which is awesome. I've listened to it. And he got named by SHRM, the HR group, as a can't miss show for leaders with our friend Brene Brown, who I talk about all the time. So we are in good company today. Joe, what is going on?
Oh, Trevor, man, I'm so glad to be with you today. So excited to talk to the folks that are listening, that are driving to work, that are driving home from work. Thanks for having me on your show, man.
Yeah, so you're studying this. You're tight in this space, and I know that you've seen not only manufacturing but other industries. So let's just start with what can companies do now?
What can companies do now to get better at finding and keeping people? There's a massive recalibration taking place right now around how work fits into our lives. And it's easy to think that it started with the pandemic, but it's actually been a really slow burn for a number of years. And so what organizations need to do right now that want to find and keep employees is really understand that we're looking for a more humane, more personalized employee experience, one where work doesn't encroach into every corner of our lives, and also one that allows us to enjoy a certain quality of life. That's a big part of what's happening right now, is that people are looking for a better quality of life. And for some people, that's a better commute. And for some people, that's better wages. And for some people, that's more fulfilling work or a better boss or a less toxic work environment. But right now, there's this reshuffling of our priorities taking place about how work fits into our lives.
Yeah, so with manufacturing, I remember the great cell phones coming out and getting that app that I could see how many parts per minute that this line's making, and waking up at 3 o'clock and looking at it, and then almost having that expectation of, if I got a call, I should know what's going on with the line, even though I'm not at work, because that's just what's expected if you want to be in this role. And you're seeing a shift in that, Joe?
Absolutely. You're describing this sort of connectivity that has grown and grown and grown, where we used to have firmer boundaries between our work and our life, especially for managers, especially for folks who lead teams. We're constantly reaching for that small device that lives in our pockets, and we're seeing emails and we're seeing notifications and we're responding to them after dinner or first thing in the morning. And this is the encroachment of work into our day-to-day lives that wasn't necessarily in place even just 10, 15 years ago. It's a huge shift. And what we're seeing now when it comes to folks who are looking for new employment opportunities is a kind of pushing back against that, of boundary setting, of people saying, you know what, I need to make time for my kids, make time to be a better partner or spouse. I'm the primary caregiver to an elderly parent, so I need to make sure that I set firm boundaries around my job so that I can fulfill those duties as well.
I love giving scenarios where I get stuck, Joe, and bringing in experts like you. So I'm coaching a client in senior leadership in manufacturing, and she's talking about just being on vacation, and I was asking about the vacation, and it's like, good, but 2 hours on this, I had to call on here. And, and so I started just asking some questions, and my intention was care of, is there something else you could do other than taking those calls? But it was more of the, you don't understand, this is the way it is. Yeah. And if I go outside of this and I'm not taking those calls, then I don't feel good about what I'm contributing. And the further the conversation went, it was more like, well, almost like judgment. Well, maybe I'm not doing a good job. What my intention was is, hey, it's okay, but there may be a different solution. What would you do in this situation where, hey, I want to make sure I'm committed and I love doing this, but I know that person's not coming recharged from vacation.
Right. That's right. And the number one reason that people don't take a vacation when they have time, paid time given to them by an employer, is fear of falling behind at work. We
Yes.
know that people are afraid of going on vacation and coming back to a million emails, or that they're going to have to be contacted again and again to put fires out while they're on vacation. And so we have a couple things that organizations can do. And really, I put the onus on the organization, right? That leader that you're talking about will set better boundaries and participate more meaningfully in their vacation if they're repeatedly encouraged to do so by their employer, by that person's boss. That also requires that organization to have some things in place that allow that person to go on vacation and be able to unplug and know that their work is covered, know that there's another person there who has the expertise that they have, or who can step in at least for a short amount of time to cover their work. And so the organization has to put those things in place, and they have to be vocal about encouraging people to take time off. It's lip service if you tell your employees that you prioritize their wellness, their well-being, but then you don't have the infrastructure in place in terms of personnel or policy that allows them to go take a vacation every once in a while.
Yeah, that's a good feedback, Joe. So makes me think of just creating more dialogue, not necessarily with the individual, but with the leadership group of the organization, because it is a large organization where they could pull on other resources. So it's more of, it always comes from the top, right? And just kind of setting that expectation. Like, number one, don't call that person when they're on vacation.
Well, and we're seeing organizations who are actually creating policy around that, Trevor. They're creating policies that say, when your out of office is turned on for your email, the emails that come in at that time get deleted. There's an out of office message that says, hey, I'm away from my desk, or I'm offline during this time period. Please contact this person for support. Your message will be deleted. If you need support upon my return, feel free to reach out. But that sort of gets rid of this fear of falling behind that so many people have. We're seeing those kinds of policies be put into place into organizations. That's a higher level commitment to creating the kind of atmosphere that people are allowed to take vacation. They're enabled to take vacation, because you're absolutely right, Trevor. I can go on vacation and I can just jump on this Zoom meeting really quick, or call into the plant, or answer these couple of questions, but I'm not getting the emotional and psychological benefits of unplugging and not thinking about work for an extended period of time. So vacation, doing work on vacation is not a vacation. It's just a really expensive commute. And we need to help people stop doing that.
So what about the person, like, if I'm just going to send Joe this information, he can read it when it gets back, and then I get a message back saying all my content's been deleted?
Well, we're seeing some companies that are saying, when emails come in for someone who has an out of office,
Yes,
we're giving that person permission to delete those emails. Or some places are creating systems, electronic systems, that delete those emails. The person who sent the email gets a notification that the person they have been contacted is out of office for a time period, and that if they have an immediate need, here's the other person that you should contact at this time, and a notification that the message to the person who's not available will be deleted, in an effort to keep their inbox relatively calm during their time away. There's a lot of different organizations who are doing this. I know some fundamental Google searches will show some examples of ways that this is taking place, but it is a thing that's happening out there in the world.
It sounds like it's a competitive advantage, right? If we're trying to attract talent, and that this company is being intentional on creating some structure so that, no, you're going to have to enjoy your vacation, like, it's not going to be an expensive commute.
Well, and it could be, think about that manager that you're coaching, that leader that you said you were coaching. This could be really anxiety producing for him or her, because there are so many of us who believe that we demonstrate our value to an organization through effort, through availability. And what we have to sometimes wrestle with is that a leader's job is to be able to teach the people around them how to operate without them, right?
Yeah.
That is really a fundamental part of what it means to be a great leader. And so if I'm a leader who is completely unable to get away because my staff constantly has to come to me with questions, then I've really enabled that in some ways. I mean, in some places it's a staffing issue. In some places it's not enough people on the bench to help step in and hold things up. But there are some places where that leader has created a kind of codependency with their team. They want to feel valued, they want to feel important. And so they end up creating these circumstances where people can't move forward on things or operate independently without them. And that's not healthy either.
No, you got me thinking, man, because when I left that session, I didn't really leave that person with a better outcome, because I didn't really, this is why I like bringing stuff up on the podcast, because these are real conversations,
Yeah.
right? Where we're having, sometimes we're always saying, hey, take responsibility yourself, look in the mirror. But there's certain points, I guess, where you get into that culture of the company, and it does feel good to be valued and then and needed, and know that, hey, they, they're reaching out to me, so I get some good and oxytocin, and because serotonin, because they need me and we're helping. But at the same time, I'm like in Cancun and this podcast is called mindfulness, so that you're
Yeah.
mindful wherever you are. And that's how we hone in on this. Yeah, really looking at it different from, how can we structure it with email? Because this would be the common problem of, well, Joe, my email box is going to be full and I just don't want to come back to that.
Absolutely.
So those are some good ideas, Joe. Let's go back to, what about the misunderstanding of what's really happening with the shortages? I know that doesn't provide a solution, but it still occupies our mind of, what are we getting wrong about this?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that we're getting wrong is what we think about as what's happening. You've probably heard terms like the Great Resignation that get thrown around. And what we know is that what's happening right now is not about quitting. What we know is that people are actually switching. They're switching jobs. And when they switch jobs, they're actually upgrading. We just talked about how people are looking for better quality of life. And sometimes that's commute or pay or my boss. But that's what's driving all of this job switching. When you look at what has happened in the US specifically over the last 2 years, we have seen more hiring than quitting in every single industry category tracked by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so when people tell you that what's happening is that there's a lot of quitting going on, that's actually only half the story. People aren't quitting, they're upgrading. The other thing that we're getting wrong about this, Trevor, is the length of time that this has been going on. People think of the staffing shortages that we're having right now, the struggles we're having to hire right now, as being sort of this new blip that has occurred since the pandemic. But this actually started back in 2010. After the recession of 2008, we saw a record level of voluntary job changing show itself in 2010. And then 2 million more people did it the next year. And then 2 million more people than that did it the year after that. And so for the last 12 plus years, we have seen more people voluntarily changing jobs than in the year before. What bends people's noodle is we were going to be at 47 plus million job changes in the United States this year, whether there was a pandemic or not. And so what's happening right now isn't an event, it's an era. All the challenges that we're having right now with finding and keeping devoted employees, they're not going away. They're not going to things aren't going to get back to the way it was just 2 or 3 years ago, because we still see more and more jobs being added to the economy and fewer people entering the labor force. It's just not enough people to fill all the available jobs in the decades ahead.
So fewer people entering the labor force. Is there less people, or is there, how does that happen?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons for it. It is less people, but there's also more folks who are starting their own businesses. There's more folks who are choosing to do their own kind of freelance work. It's just it's a volume V. If you kind of put your hands together side by side, this is the gap that's widening year after year after year. We are inventing jobs that didn't exist before because of technology and whatnot, and so we are just continuing to add jobs to the job market. And we're not keeping pace with the number of people who are available to work.
Now that's a good perspective. This whole online social media, there's there's a lot going on and somebody's getting paid to put it out there, and sponsors are
Right.
paying money to do the social media, and they're not making parts. you know?
Well, and Trevor, I got asked at a conference the other day where I was doing a keynote. Somebody came up to me afterwards and said, you said that this started 12 years ago, but it really just seems like in the last 2 years that we're seeing so many restaurants and retail locations that are struggling with staffing. So what's that about? Why is that so recent? And it was such a smart question from somebody who was really paying attention. And I said, what we point to first and foremost is the digital transformation that was brought about by the pandemic. In the spring and early summer of 2020, the CEO of Microsoft came out and said, we just experienced 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. So think about it, Trevor. How many organizations had to figure out how to communicate in video conferencing software? How many organizations had to figure out how to use online project management communication channels? How many organizations had to allow people to work from home in jobs that they never thought they'd be able to work from home in? They had to make it work. And so all of a sudden now we have organizations of every shape and size who are creating jobs where people can work from home, and they're offering salaries that are at or above what you could get to work as a waiter or waitress in a restaurant. And so we have folks who are saying, you know what? I don't want to work evenings and weekends anymore. I don't want to face rude customers and get little benefits and low wages and bad bosses. I can work from home for a call center or in a customer service role for about the same amount of money, roles that weren't digital until just a few years ago.
So many people not in factories, and they're at home and they're finding alternatives, and they're retiring early and finding different ways to have happiness and a cost of living where they can maintain what they're doing. So maybe some of that's changing as well, as just people's expectations of, hey, I may not have this lifestyle, but I don't have to go work for that boss anymore.
That's right. And the labor market right now has been so hot that they're able to leverage that demand. And I think that's another part of this that's a really important thing to point to, which is, you've probably heard people complain that nobody wants to work anymore. This is something that I call the myth of lazy. And there's just no data out there that supports this. Right now in the US, unemployment is below 3.5%. There's only been a couple of months in the last 50 years when unemployment has been lower. There's no group of people sitting on the sidelines who have decided that I'm just not going to work anymore. What we know is that prime age workers are in the workforce at a level higher than they were even just 10 years ago. So when you hear an organization saying, well, we can't fill these positions, I guess people just don't want to work anymore, the real issue there is that, no, they just don't want to work for you. So we got to take a look at, what are we paying? What are the hours? What are the expectations? I just saw, Trevor, a posting in my local community from an outpatient medical group who posted, I know that it's not manufacturing, but I think your listeners will appreciate this, posted a job that said, now hiring, help needed immediately, medical assistants must be able to draw blood, $13 an hour, healthcare and full and paid vacation available after 1 year of employment. So let me run that down again. $13 an hour, medical assistant who must be able to draw blood, will give you some healthcare benefits and some time off after a year. That is magical thinking. It's a fantasy land if that person thinks they're going to find somebody. You want a specialist, you want an MA who can draw blood, and you're not going to expect them to be able to take a day off or need some kind of healthcare coverage for a year. This is what I mean when I say that people just don't want to work in environments that no longer fit their quality of life.
So it's a shift of thinking of getting that right person. And this is what when I talk to clients that are looking for people, I always like to look at, well, who do you have right now? And how are you utilizing the people in your organization today? And that's always our greatest gift. The best people in a plant are the ones that are inside the four walls today. And since you're an expert on what's going on outside of the four walls of manufacturing, the quiet quitting, how does that affect manufacturing? Because we've never really talked about that on this podcast.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, man. And I guess it depends on which definition of quiet quitting we're talking about, because the rise of this term has led to a really interesting dialogue. In some corners, the idea of quiet quitting is what you and I might call healthy boundary setting, right? It's
Mhm.
people who have said, I've constantly done many of the things we just talked about right at the top of the podcast. I'm checking email at night. I'm returning calls. I'm sort of always on. And I
Mhm.
need to set healthier boundaries so that I can work more reasonable hours and manage a more reasonable workload. And in that way, that's a good thing, but we should have organizations doing that for their employees. We shouldn't have to have personnel pushing back and saying, this is too much, it's too demanding, I'm not able to keep up, I'm burned out, I'm overworked. Organizations need to be monitoring that and setting those healthy boundaries, or creating a culture where setting those healthy boundaries is encouraged. That said, Trevor, in most corners, the topic of quiet quitting has really focused around those folks who do the minimum, those folks who
Mm.
go through the motions and do just enough to get by. And this isn't new. This has actually been
No.
around for a long time. All your plant managers listening to this have had people on their teams that are just punching a clock and
Mhm.
going through the motions. Gallup, who does a ton of research in employee engagement, has a great line about these folks. They say, these are your employees who quit but forgot to leave. And I'm sure everybody listening to this has had somebody like that on their team. And so in this way, quiet quitting is just a newfangled term for something that's been around for a long time. We know there are people on teams who are not engaged. They don't have an emotional and psychological commitment to their work. And when that's the case, when they don't experience the conditions at work that activate an emotional and psychological commitment, they coast. They do the minimum. They go through the motions. They become quiet quitters.
So if you're going into the manufacturing plant today, and it's a place that you want to go into, you're going in there, no one's forcing you. You want people to stay that are there. You want people to be engaged. So whether you're the boss or whether you're a co-worker and you've just listened to this, what's the one main tip that you want to leave listeners thinking about today?
We've done a lot of research in recent years about what leads people to join an organization, stay long term, and give it all they've got in their job consistently over time. And I will tell you, Trevor, commitment and retention appear when employees get to do their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss. So that book you just talked about at the top of the show, this is the whole framework that we've written about. Every single piece of research you see about what leads employees to be engaged, to be committed, comes back to ideal job, meaningful work, or great boss. Every story you're hearing in the news right now about why people are leaving organizations or why people are joining new employers comes down to whether or not they get to do their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss. These are the three most influential factors in the employee experience. And we know that when people get to experience them, they become emotionally and psychologically committed. They join, they stay, they care, they try, they tell others in their network, hey, I get to come to this place and I'm getting paid well. I'm enjoying a relatively reasonable workload. I get flexibility. There are dimensions to each of these ideas of ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. But that's the big three. When people can say that they get all three of those ideas from their employer, they join, stay, care, and try.
So Joe, that's a great framework. Makes total sense. How do I take that on the floor today? Like what's one skill that can help us build on those three concepts?
Well, I think one of the most important skills that leaders have to embrace that doesn't get talked about very often is storytelling. Leaders have to be able to create line of sight between even the most mundane tasks and duties of someone's job and the difference their work makes in the lives of others. So we talked about meaningful work as one of these big three factors. We know that people experience meaningful work when they experience purpose, when they believe that their work makes a difference in the lives of others. And so if I have somebody who's working on an assembly line or working in a plant and they're working on a very small component or one piece of a larger assembly, I want to be able to connect the dots to how what that person is doing keeps a family safe when they get in their car, or
Mhm.
allows the end user at the end of the purchase of that product to experience joy or to avoid suffering. I want to raise the emotional stakes around what that person is doing. I want to connect every single one of those actions, every single one of those pieces or parts, every single one of those repeatable productivity actions that people engage in to a real life person. Connect each one of those parts remind folks that that's somebody's grandmother. somebody's
Mhm.
daughter,
Mhm.
somebody's neighbor, that it's a retired Marine, that it's a doctor, that it's somebody in public service who's feeding the homeless. If we can connect people's work, even the most basic, boring parts of our work, to the way it impacts real world people, we start to supercharge that purpose, and that makes people's work more meaningful.
That is the biggest trend. Even last episode, talking to Shark regarding any marketing, people don't want to see pretty people with nice
Mhm.
backgrounds. They want to see people that are working at that plant.
Yeah.
What's the real story of the outcome of what we're making today? In manufacturing, it is a mindset shift of, I'm not just making this part, I'm impacting someone's life.
Yep.
And if there's any time to build off that momentum, is during this supply chain shortage. Like,
Right.
look at the impact we're having. Look how important this is. And if everybody's working from home, we got nothing to purchase or to work with.
Yep.
So we need to sustain ourselves. It's such an important topic, Joe. And thanks for, dedicating, your focus and coming out with this book. Tell us a little bit more about the book as we leave here, and how it came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, interestingly enough, I was doing a podcast interview like this one about a year and a half ago. And as you said at the top, I speak and write about commitment in the workplace. And I was answering a whole lot of questions from the host about, where does commitment come from? We had this really rich discussion. And then at the end of the podcast, he said, "All right, Joe, let's get you out of here on this. Give it to us in one neat and tidy package, in one sentence. Where does commitment come from at work?" And I went, blah, 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 blah. And this giant word salad tumbled out of my mouth. And I said, I don't think I can give it to you in one sentence. We just talked about a whole host of factors that need to be in place in order for, people to care and try at work. And I just kind of rambled. And I realized afterwards that my answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't concise. And I thought, that's a problem. No wonder we have so many folks who are struggling to find and keep devoted employees, because people have to memorize a doctoral dissertation's worth of leadership knowledge in order to create an environment where people can be at their best at work. And I thought, you know what? I need a one sentence answer to that question. Where does
Mhm.
commitment come from at work? And so I set off on a path to write that one sentence. It turned into a framework, and it turned into this book. And you heard that one sentence earlier, Trevor. Commitment and retention appear when people get to do their ideal job doing meaningful work for a great boss. So, thanks for the chance to come on the
Bam.
podcast today and talk about the book. It's available for pre-order now. It releases in May. You can pre-order it on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, on any major retailer.
Well, I will be pre-ordering, Joe, not just because I have a lot of respect for you and the important work that you're doing, but I think it can help our clients and bringing in your concepts and your expertise.
Well,
So
thank
yeah,
you, man. And if you can't spell employalty, I know that's a tricky word. You can just look it up under my name, Joe Mull, Mull.
awesome. And we will have links in the show notes. Check them out, that you can easily pre-order or follow Joe on his YouTube, on his podcast. And he's always just in front of that next problem with a solution. So thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.